Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fireside Chat with Dr. Akhtar Badshah, author of Purpose Mindset. Today, employees desire to contribute to something bigger than themselves now more than ever. His book tells us how cultivating a purpose mindset can empower every individual to have a larger impact at work and in personal lives. Like Akhtar says, without purpose, we lose our path. So before we start our conversation, I would like to introduce him to everyone. Many of you might already know him well. He is a distinguished practitioner at the University of Washington at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance, the Business School Bottle campus, and he's also the faculty advisor at the Start Center Department of Global Health. He is the founder and curator of Accelerating Social Transformation, a mid professional development certificate course on social impact. Dr. Badshah is a seasoned executive with over 30 years of experience in international development, managing a corporate philanthropic program, and co funding a global nonprofit for social enterprise. He is also a chief catalyst at Catalytic Innovators Group and serves on the boards of Microsoft Alumni Network. Apart from all this, he is an accomplished artist and a doctoral graduate of MIT. Today, we also have with us Harshul Asnani, SVP and Business Head, West Coast Tech Mahindra. Welcome, Dr. Badshah and Harshul. I now request Harshul to take this conversation ahead with Dr. Akhtar Badshah.
Thank you so much, Swati, and thanks everyone for joining. And welcome to what promises to be a very engaging conversation with Akhtar on a topic that has come into prominence in recent times: purpose. Uh, this word has been tossed around quite a bit in management books, but most organizations have just done a lip service to it. But things are changing, particularly with the pandemic. Purpose-driven organizations are probably the answer to building better societies and giving meaning and renewed motivation to employees. And frankly, Akhtar, thank you so much for joining us. And there is no better person that one can think of than you to discuss this so relevant and important topic. You are a very important voice in teaching the world the principles of compassionate business. And in the little time that I've known you, I've really found you to be very diverse and an intellectual person who traverses um, architecture to being an artist, to being an expert on philanthropy, a writer. I don't know what else that I'm missing here, but um, you know, we're really looking forward to the conversation with you today.
Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to folks that are joining from other parts of the world. Harshul and Swati, thank you very much for inviting me. I just want to start off by just acknowledging the crisis that we are coming out of here in the US, but more importantly in India, given the current impact of COVID there, which has probably not spared any family with an extended circle of people that have either contracted COVID or know somebody that has contracted COVID or have gone through some tough times. So I just want to acknowledge that and then also just highlight what I saw and what I read in how Tech Mahindra and Mahindra itself rose to the challenge. And I bring that out simply because to kind of just articulate and further emphasize what Harshul started off by saying, that purpose is becoming a driving factor in how businesses think about themselves as their place in society, and how now people and companies are going beyond just lip service, but absorbing and inculcating a purpose mindset within how they show up for life if I use the terminology used by Bill Gates Sr. So I just want to kind of start with that and then kind of move to the second part of that question as to my journey. I am kind of an oddball in this. Most people kind of, at some point in time in their lives, decide who they want to serve. I have never been able to figure out that at all. My goal was to be an architect. I studied architecture in India, went to MIT to study architecture, and the goal was that I would come out of that amazing training, wear round glasses, a black turtleneck t-shirt, and design massive buildings and be one of these world-renowned architects. But that didn't come to fruition because life in that very short period of time, the first 2 years while I was at MIT with my master's degree, exposed me to work with the dean of the school just because I needed a job. I needed to pay for my scholarship and for my tuition, who introduced me to a whole new world, which was research and academia. And I started working with him to launch a new center called Design for Islamic Societies. And that took me into a whole new space of academia, research. And I got my PhD when an opportunity came by some friends and colleagues that were working at the UN and the World Bank and USAID to start a new center on cities and mega cities. And I decided to take the jump and be part of that effort. And luckily, my wife was much smarter than I am, had done her computer science at MIT, and got a job at Microsoft in New York, New Jersey. So it allowed us to make that move. And then I followed her to Seattle when she moved to Seattle. And there I got exposed to this whole terminology around digital divide in the late 1999 and became part of a new effort that was launched called Digital Partners Foundation, where we were a very small organization, but the first organization that was focused on bridging the digital divide through supporting social entrepreneurs in India, in China, in Latin America, in Africa, through funding that we were doing through the diaspora community. People from that part of the world that were in the US, were in the tech sector, late 1999, height of the dot-com bubble. And that then introduced me to Microsoft and the Microsoft leadership that asked me to join the company and lead their philanthropy team, which I did for 10 years, which became the basis for my book. And then I decided to go back to teaching and consulting and doing things that I now want to do. It wasn't that I was unsatisfied as Microsoft or I'd run out of steam. It was that I just change my career path every 10 years. And it kind of just keeps me young, I suppose, at least in my head.
What a journey! What a journey! From being an architect by training, to traverse multiple facets as you have gone along. To me, what really impresses the most is your expertise in philanthropy and how you have come to become an internationally known expert on this. That segues me into your book. Um, I've read your book on very fascinating. Um, so, Akhtar, why this book, Purpose Mindset, and why now?
So, the journey for the book actually was in my head while I was at Microsoft. And Purpose Mindset was never the title. To me, it was about telling this untold story about Microsoft, where Microsoft was seen as this hyper aggressive, hyper competitive technology company that had changed the world through technology. And yet, what people were not knowing is that the number of people that were coming out of Microsoft that were also changing the world through their social impact work that they were doing. And I felt that that was a story to capture as to how workplace can provide opportunities for individuals to explore all facets of their minds and their energy. And in doing so, the company becomes much richer as a culture and as a productive environment. So that was the essence of writing the book. And as I wrote the book, what became very fascinating was as I talked to so many different people, and I had the luxury of interviewing some of the finest individuals, accomplished individuals in the world. And I basically started off by saying, just talk to me your journey in life. And everybody started whatever they could remember since their childhood, and how some early experience shaped certain aspects of their DNA, which eventually got amplified, cultivated, and flourished at Microsoft, both in their business world and other work that they were doing. And that this was the fascinating thing to me, which kind of got me to think through that there is something going on, and that Microsoft is not just unique in attracting these kinds of people, right? I've interacted with people all over the world, and I see that same thing happening over and over again. And that there is a mindset. And we in the business world have been driven through growth mindset as a mantra. Have a growth mindset. And that is absolutely right. Right? Growth mindset allows you to grow and flourish, but it also has impact on your work and your workplace, allows them to flourish or it to flourish, and it then comes back to you in your growth. But that's a duality, that's an yin and yang relationship. But what I found increasingly is that people were looking for a trinity, where that same personal growth led to work growth, but also should lead to community growth. And if you can achieve that, then you get the balance in life that people are seeking that goes beyond just work and self, because we don't exist in these two environments. And that's why the book kind of focuses on purpose as that renewable source of energy that keeps lighting us up.
Well, amazing. I think renewable source of energy, what a phrase they use, because I read somewhere that it's not the results that inspire people, it's the purpose that does. And it was backed up. This statement was backed up by a research that was conducted in 1950s, and the name of the researcher escapes me, but which kind of demonstrated that the people's desire to work or study or generally better themselves really rests on motivations that are much deeper than just financial security. In the research, they had asked this lottery question, right? Saying that, hey, if you won a lottery today, would you still continue to work?
Yeah.
And the answer overwhelmingly was a yes. And the research also showed that there was this misconception in the dominant thinking about why people work, which is carried forward even after maybe 70 years of that research, that people work primarily for money, which is not true. And as you rightly said, the research in fact showed that even if we had enough money to support ourselves, we would still want to work because work gives a person a feeling of being tied to something bigger than themselves, being tied to a larger society, right? Of having something to do, to having a purpose in life. So it was, and subsequent to that, I'm sure there are numerous other researchers that would have corroborated this belief and the meaning and the purpose that goes far beyond money as people come to work.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So, Aaron Hurst, who lives here in Seattle, wrote a book called The Purpose Economy. And his research, where he did interviews with different companies and employees there, and he basically categorizes employees into three broad buckets: people that are driven by purpose, people that are driven by money, and people that are driven by status. And he's not making any value judgment. He's essentially saying that there are certain people who are just driven by purpose. It's the kind of work they want to do. There are other people who are motivated by financial security because they might have come from an environment where need to be financially secure. I mean, Arshal, my story was I came in on a scholarship, I graduated, I needed to pay off my loans.
yeah,
So my first basic thing was, hey, let's get a job that pays and a job that will get you a visa. Then other things came, right?
right,
For certain people, it is the status that matters because they came from backgrounds where they were not appreciated. And a particular position gives them that status and their reason to exist. But what he also argues is that there is a secondary driver that everybody has. So for those that are driven by purpose, the secondary driver might be status or money. But for those that are driven by money and status, if we can inculcate the secondary driver as purpose, now in a company, you've got a much larger group of people that are motivated by purpose. So that's one. The second, there is this, saying that we all kind of relate to. It is not the destination that counts, it is the journey that counts.
right.
But I think that people have actually added to that it's no longer the journey that counts. It is actually who you take that journey with that counts. And purpose is that you can't make change on your own. You have to kind of have people on that journey with you. And who you surround it and who comes on that journey with you makes a difference. And what a company does is that it allows us to find those people with whom we want to take that journey. And if an organization creates that space for people to discover that kind of connections, now you see that paying off in spades, both in how they show up for work, but also how they show up in the community.
No, absolutely, Akhtar. So well said. I will come to Tech Mahindra and our culture in a bit, and we have spoken about this earlier also, Akhtar. But um, since your book really delves into Microsoft, and that's where you spent a lot of your years at the helm of the philanthropic effort at Microsoft. Uh, and as I was reading, it's evident the book gives so many insights into how Microsoft has developed and continues to foster this culture of giving. Uh, can you share some nuggets, anecdotes that you were referring to earlier on, based on the interviews that you did with so many of Microsoft executives, and more importantly, how do they do this, and what could be the learnings for the rest of the corporate world to start adopting it, particularly in these trying times when purpose becomes so important?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. So let me just start off by saying that it was fortunate that Bill Gates grew up in a family that was very philanthropic. A mother and father were already involved as leading members of Seattle's philanthropic community. And Bill kind of says that, I grew up where my mom just used my tongue to lick envelopes. And my father basically got me to stand on a street corner with a placard.
Wow.
But it was his mother who in 1983 insisted that the company create a payroll deduction program for United Way. And she was on the board of United Way, and United Way is that community-based organization that promotes and supports lots of human and social services work. So there's just this effort to not even match anything, but just to have an opportunity for employees to donate directly through the payroll deduction. So they don't have to kind of worry about it, which led to about $17,000 being donated. Much smaller company in 1983. 1985, Bill Newcomb joins as the chief legal officer. He comes having worked with Bill Gates Sr. in his law firm. His background is also very fascinating, where his parents were also involved in philanthropy in the Bay Area, which is where he grew up. But he basically asked Bill and John Shirley, who was the president of the company at that time, that I not only want to be the chief legal officer, but I want under me corporate affairs, industry affairs, government affairs, and community affairs. And I kind of said, okay, I understand the first three. At government affairs, companies focused on IP, governments are big clients, so you need a focus on that. Industry, the software industry was becoming bigger, coalitions were forming, associations were forming, you needed to be part of that. Corporate, you needed to play with other corporations. So I get that. But why community? And what he said was incredibly foresightful. That here are all these young 20-something people working 18, 20 hours doing technology to change the world. There has to be a way by which I should be able to provide them, the company should be able to provide them with an opportunity to get to know their community. They will grow up here, they will get married here, they will have kids here, and it is upon us to introduce them into the community, and community affairs became that vehicle through which individuals were involved or given the opportunity to get involved in the community through the matching gifts program. And Bill had the foresight to actually say, we're not going to restrict this. We're going to make it open to any organization of the employee's choice. And Bill basically said at that time, this is 1985. In his interviews, he tells me that I wasn't sure whether we will run out of money if everybody decided to do the match. But the basic thing was that if we're going to do this, let's do it in a bold way. And he was very frustrated the first few years because most people just gave to their alma maters and not really to community organizations, because it is easy for a university knows how to ask for money. They are a fully fledged, well-oiled machine. But over time, it started becoming part of the DNA. Things needed to happen. Things became part of it. And you fast forward to 2020, and from 17,000, last year the company raised 220 million.
Wow.
Including the match. Right? But you didn't know that in 1986, and in 1985, if somebody had done that calculation, you would have said no. Right? I mean, the chief financial officer at Microsoft still worries about it. But so that's the history. Now, what did it do? It created people like Rajiv and Arpita Agarwal, who I highlight in the book. Coming out of rural India, happens to be lucky to go to IIT Kanpur, gets to the University of Michigan, and lands a job at Microsoft at the right time. And they basically utilize this match as a way to continuously give back to the communities that they grew up in. Because for them, it was just doubling their money. Right? To Kevin Wang, who joins the company as a young software engineer, but has come from Berkeley, having taught computer science in high school, goes to Harvard to get his master's in education, needs to pay off his loan, joins Microsoft, and decides that he can actually volunteer an hour a day to teach computer science in a high school in Seattle. Because of the 64,000 high schools in this country, only 2,000 of them have qualified teachers who teach computer science. So people, so it's the math teacher, it's the physics teacher, or it's the coach, or it's the gym, whoever, and most of them are basically teaching word processing, not computer science. And that if you wanted to, increase the pipeline, one way to do it is to get volunteers into the classroom to teach. And having had that training, he created a program that goes from one individual teaching on his own to now 6,000 professionals from companies across the country. Every tech company has volunteers that are teaching in over 600 high schools, AP computer science, introductory computer science in marginalized schools around the country.
Wow.
Just one individual who for 3 years, I kept pushing him away. Because I said, all of this computer science, we should go down into kids with no computer skills and just teach them basic computers. Till Satya Nadella, who's now the CEO but was not the CEO at that time, called me up and said, hey man, I've got this guy in my team doing this work. Why is he not working for you? This is what we should be doing as a company. So not everybody has the vision. I didn't have that vision. But somebody else had that vision and then forced me to move there. But today it has impacted hundreds of thousands of kids in this country and around the world where it is getting emulated. And then I'll just end with one last story of Roberto Angelo and his wife Francesca Fideli in Italy. They had a kid after multiple tries, and the child gets a stroke in childbirth and is, partially paralyzed on one side. And for the first 2 years, they spend time trying to help him overcome the weaknesses till they meet a neurosurgeon who introduces them to the mirror concept and can work on the strengths of the child, and the weaker part will emulate and over time become strong. And they do that, and the first thing they saw in the kid's eye was joy. And now Marco is 14 years old, more or less normal, but he's never going to be fully normal. But what they did is, because when Microsoft and when Satya came in, he set up the hackathons. They actually created a global team to hack an app that can recognize the onset of epilepsy, which is what parents need most when kids are in this situation. And now that has become a major product with the company's leadership 4 weeks ago discussing how they can actually introduce it into the healthcare system around the world.
Wow.
Right. So there are lots of different ways in which a company can excite the imagination of these individuals and provide them with the opportunity to flourish.
Yeah, and as you rightly said, Akhtar, it is in Microsoft DNA now. Maybe it wasn't there earlier, but because of the founder's passion and his upbringing, maybe it all started at the top. Uh, but today, I believe this culture of giving. I would say good attracts good. And over a period of time, this whole culture of giving, this whole purpose mindset has percolated down to the organization. And I mean, that's the impression I formed as I read the book, which was replete with such amazing stories that you just narrated. The humbling, many were very emotional. Um, it took a while for Microsoft to build a DNA like this, and then kind of started attracting this whole ecosystem and associates and employees who kind of nurtured that mindset. Did they have a formal structure to do this, or it just happened over a period of time? Did it just happen
So,
inorganically?
I mean, I think that, initially, no. But then, of course, the philanthropy team got, codified under Bill Newcomb. And then when he left and Brad Smith came, he carried it forward. And, I came in to under Brad to run the philanthropy team. And now my successors. And it has continuously evolved. New things have been added in. The group that was there in the 90s were a very different world than what it is today.
Uh,
The company also went through a very different period when I was there, where it didn't grow in its stocks. People were not becoming that wealthy. So we had to do different things to motivate people. So this is an engine, right? You have to keep feeding it.
I
And you have to do new things. And we didn't have a volunteer program before. Now there is a volunteer program which is also evolved into micro volunteering, so that people can actually do small acts of volunteering. There was no hackathon. Now there are hackathons. The amount of money that you can get matched has increased. How you get matched has increased. Programs around the world have started to flourish. So the company grows. But I think what is actually very interesting is, which is what I kind of highlight, Bill Hill, who's now the head of Vulcan, which is Paul Allen's companies. When I interviewed him, I mean, he said that, Akhtar, at Microsoft, being part of the employee giving campaign was a privilege. At other companies, it is an expectation. And Microsoft created this thing where people wanted to be part of it versus being forced to be part of it. And when I came in, we were actually moving towards that being forced. And we were getting pushback from employees because suddenly the groups were becoming hyper competitive. Managers were kind of asking employees to participate and donate. We had all these thermometers that were showing which group is winning and which group was. And we had to dial that down. And we had to come up with a new way of measuring success.
That's
So all of
interesting.
these things need to happen.
So, I mean, I was as you were speaking, I was thinking back um, of the years that I've spent here in this company, and the DNA that you spoke about. It's not very easy to define DNA, right? Particularly when it comes to the softer aspects of purpose, which are not necessarily very quantifiable. We have these like initiatives called Josh in the company. It's all completely employee driven. We have a formal Tech Mahindra Foundation, which is in some sense the CSR arm of the company. But many of these kind of suddenly came to the forefront during COVID.
Yeah.
The number of volunteers who came out to support, particularly when the second wave that raged in India of COVID that raged in India just last month, it was incredible and humbling to see the outpour of humanity coming in from within Tech Mahindra. As they say, when the goings get tough, the tough get going, and
Right.
I think it's somewhere the DNA that's not necessarily top down, but maybe it's like the good attracts good. And I never, to be very honest with you, been in a leadership position in this company for quite some time, and I always knew we had this amazing DNA of uh, had this purpose that we had for our organization. We have this set of principles that we call as RISE principles. Right? They are not necessarily just a set of principles that are put up on a wall, but the principles that we have our associates live by, and I believe from top to bottom as we go out and attract more talent, we kind of even subconsciously try to look for some of these tenets, and maybe that is all that came to the fore in a crisis situation like this. Just to delve for another 30 seconds on what rises for us. The three simple but yet powerful principles. One is accepting no limits.
Yeah.
Second is how do we bring in that alternate thinking into the jobs that we do. And third, last but not the least, is driving positive change. And for me, the last one is the most important. And the operative word for me is the positive change. Right?
Yes.
It's in some sense, rise is more like a call to action and for us to challenge the status quo and the conventional thinking, and to constantly try and seek new and better solutions, not just for ourselves, but for the societies and the broader stakeholders that we serve. And how do we continue to make the world a better place? Whether it is through Mahindra's automotive or keeping Tech Mahindra one of the most sustainable and green organizations globally. We are among the top in India, so on and so forth. So, and I know Anand, and I know you met with Anand. Maybe you'd like to bring your view on Tech Mahindra and broadly with the Mahindra Group. I know your association with Anand dates back more than 20 years, but do you believe there are some commonalities and having been a champion of purpose and philanthropy, what do you think Mahindra stands from an outside-in perspective? I may be biased looking at it from
No,
inside.
no, no, and you're absolutely correct. So when I left and joined when I left MIT and joined this organization called Mega Cities Project, one of the things that we were focused on was how do we get mega cities over 10 million, to get the corporate sector and the government sector to work together. And we would convene efforts. New York has the New York City Partnership. Now Seattle has its Business Roundtable. London has London First. And we actually launched something called Mumbai First. And Nasser Munji, who used to be the head of HFDC at that time, and I got introduced to Keshavbhai Mahindra at that time, and I went to meet him in the Apollo Towers in Mumbai, and he invited Anand to that meeting. And we spoke, and I kind of understood at that time how committed the company was to efforts to ensure that the community thrived, and business leaders held a much bigger responsibility than even government leaders who kind of come and go. But businesses are rooted in communities.
Yeah.
Right. So that kind of became very fascinating, where, of course, Anand and then Nasser Munji and others, Naina Lal Kidwai, who was at HSBC, Nasser was at IDF actually, and so there were all of these leaders at that time who apparently were all classmates at Harvard.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, of course, and that's where I have always been very fascinated with the Mahindra Group, because of that leadership and the origin story of the company, how it came about. Very fascinating connections between, even in our Indian-Pakistan context, Indian Muslim partnership. Ghulam Mohammed went on to become the first finance minister of Pakistan. So
Yeah.
there is this amazing story behind a company which is much richer than the fact that it actually creates and sells tractors
Yeah.
or buses or jeeps or
Yeah.
does technology service.
That's right. That's right. So well put, Akhtar. In fact, as you rightly said, Ghulam Mohammed moved to Pakistan. The company was earlier known as, it's still known as M&M, but M&M used to stand for Mahindra and Mohammed. So now
Yes,
it's called Mahindra and Mahindra. So
correct.
yeah, yeah. So I have one more question, last question, but probably last two questions for you. Um, Profit versus purpose. Uh, does it have to be one versus other? Um, Can they, in fact, feed into each other? Can they coexist? Or do you think purpose could really lead to being a more profitable organization as a natural byproduct? Because look at Microsoft today, uh, one of probably the second most valuable company in the world. Or depending on the day you wake up, maybe the most valuable company in the world, um, and with philanthropy at its heart. So So what's your view on, is it profit and purpose, or is it profit versus purpose? Can they coexist? Can they collaborate? Can they feed into each other?
So there is no company without profit,
Yeah.
right? So profit has to be in the equation. Companies exist to make profit. Profit is not a bad word. I mean, businesses are not bad. Inherently, businesses are all made out of people. Right?
Yeah.
So profit is not, it cannot, has to be part of the equation. But then you kind of look at it and say, so I'll answer this by Satya's quote in the book, that if companies are just going to be rent seekers, they will cease to exist. But if companies can actually be there to make a contribution to the betterment of society, they will continue to thrive. So, why does a company exist? That's the purpose.
Yeah.
And if the purpose is not just profits, but it is profits for the betterment of society, and why I bring in the Trinity is because of that. That if you can put in the Trinity, that Trinity becomes much more powerful. It contributes to happier employees, more productive employees, employees that want to stay longer, employees want, they see that the work that they do contributes to the higher purpose. They see that they can actually even activate their own personal purpose through their companies.
Yeah.
And eventually it leads to a much better business outcome. And I'll just give you one example. When I was the head of Microsoft Philanthropy, I could walk into any country literally and get meetings with any minister I wanted, or at times even the head of state. And I always took the GM of that country with me to those meetings.
Absolutely.
And what it did was that my work would last for 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then the dinner or the lunch conversation would be relationship making between the GM
Yeah.
and whoever was in that meeting. And
No,
I would
so
I
go ahead.
would tell the GM, these leaders, they would invite me now. They would rather have me come than a business leader come into the country, because I help open doors, and I would tell them, go sit on a board.
Yeah.
There might be the defense minister on the board.
Yeah.
And in 2 years, you might actually become friends, and then you will actually have a contract.
Yeah.
So think of selling in a very different way.
That
And
makes
so
makes
that
sense.
changed, and that's where I think why purpose and profits go together.
Goes together. In fact, purpose fuels better profits, in my
Correct.
opinion. Yeah.
Yep.
And Microsoft is a ripe example of that. My last question before we can open it up for Q&A from the audience, if you have any. The audience today, Akhtar is a bunch of technology practitioners, sales leaders, delivery leaders, many individual contributors, and what do you think could be a takeaway for everybody? Not necessarily leadership of an organization to help drive a purpose kind of a mindset from top down, but how can everybody harness a purpose mindset in their the day-to-day jobs and day-to-day lives?
So I'll kind of just state a quote. Amanda Gorman, who's a young poet laureate, she actually spoke at President Biden's inauguration.
Yes.
And this is, as part of the poem, this is what was one of the verses. For there is always light, if only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it. What I'm asking the leadership, and I'm asking every individual, is purpose is that renewable energy that allows you to see the light, that allows you to turn on that light within you. So do it. Also shift your thinking from not who you want to be, but to who you want to serve. And in Tech Mahindra, who you serve is humanity to effectively utilize technology so they can become better. And what you are doing, whether it is providing back-end services or whether doing high-end hosting or whether doing repairs, is all because the end result is that there is a kid somewhere in India in a village that can actually get connected to the internet and through knowledge is changing his village or her village. And that's the purpose of why it is so important to shift this mindset.
No, I think so. Well said. Yeah, and it is top down, it is grounds up, it happens sideways. It just morphs into an organization as people rally together. And as we saw during the crisis times of COVID, how people came together, rallied together. They didn't have to be told.
Yeah,
It just came
exactly.
together. Yeah. And no, with that, no, thank you so much, Akhtar. I know we have about 10 minutes left. And I'll request Swati to help us moderate the Q&A. I don't see in the chat, but I know there were a lot of questions which had come via email, Swati. So I don't know if you invite people to come in and ask, or how do you want to structure this?
I'll keep this open for audience. If they have any questions, they can directly ask Akhtar. Otherwise, there were a few questions that have come up from the team. I can take it up.
Yeah, let's see if people can unmute themselves and ask.
Hey Swati, can you hear me?
Yeah, that is.
Wonderful session after Harshul. I think we talked about, my question is probably for another P of your two Ps which you talked about, right? Profit and purpose. Was thinking maybe, Akhtar, if you can comment on another P which could be very related to the topic you have, that is peace. Profit, purpose, and peace in the context of individual, family, community, and how we see the work which we do, how an individual contribute in his work, how an individual contribute in his society, community, and in larger, society. Would you comment on that?
Yes, Dinesh, actually, this is the first time I've actually heard the use of the word peace, which I think is actually very fascinating. Today, we actually use people, planet, purpose, and profits. But peace is actually a very fascinating word because in some ways it encompasses people and planet.
Yeah.
Because we are doing all of this for the betterment of the planet and for the betterment of people. Profits are for whom? Purpose is for whom? So yes, so the vocabulary is no longer just this dialogue between purpose and profits, but it is about planet, people, purpose, profits. And I think what it actually then leads to, if you want to kind of use it in the frame that you have highlighted as peace, and peace in my mind is, the stable state of the world so that humanity can thrive. So I love that framing. Thank you very much for introducing that.
So,
Swati, can I go next?
please go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Akhtar. My name is Manish Bakle, based here in the Bay Area. Very inspiring kind of a session with you. I'd heard about some of these aspects, but the fact that you were able to sum up this very succinctly was very useful. But I was also thinking when you were talking about this that what you're saying is pretty much, well, not pretty much, it's happening in reality, but it's a little idealistic, right? How do when is this too much? For instance, the purpose. When do you think it should be limited a little bit so that it does not interfere with the business of business, right? So, for instance, at Microsoft itself, when employees with a purpose start guiding or start opinionating on or opining on what whether the company should work with the US Army or not, or at Google, for instance, there's been this outcry about working with the immigration agencies, right? So that's also, you could say that you have employees with a purpose. They are definitely kind of working for what they think is right and the good of society. But that's kind of interfering with the business of the company. What are your thoughts on that?
No, it's a very so again, you can take this into so many different directions, right? It's not, and you've given these two excellent examples. But let's take Microsoft's response, right? What was Brad Smith's response? Right, Brad Smith's response was not to shut down that conversation. His response was, yeah, let's have that conversation. But also recognize that, we have businesses with the government, which is very important for us to continue to do. And here are all the changes we make through our partnership with governments. So, open conversations does not necessarily mean that it might interfere with the business. It really depends on how the leadership views it. If the leadership views it as dissent, then it might try and stamp it down. But if leadership views it as a conversation, then it will actually allow forums for it to thrive, which then kind of leads to mindset shifts. And some of them have been extremely positive, right? When you kind of look at, let's take AI and ethics. AI and ethics kind of became part of this conversation among employees, which then percolated up into Microsoft research, which has now become a very key tenet of how Microsoft does business. And it has actually flourished into a whole purpose-driven effort being done by Jean-Philippe Courtois, who's the president of Microsoft Global, where he's actually created this whole group around AI for good and working with governments to actually showcase why Microsoft is a much better partner than anybody else. So you can take something that could have been seen as being controversial, but it has actually now become a far more effective way in which Microsoft is dealing with governments and artificial intelligence to drive business. And Microsoft research is helping guide that conversation, right, into products. So I think that there are very different ways in which you can think about it. And yes, of course, a lot of this, trust me, I ran Microsoft Philanthropy and I would get people come in every single day telling me what I should fund and how I should fund and what I should do and what I should not do. And at times you would say, including Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates and everybody else would come and say, this is where we should spend our money. And I had to figure out how to say, guide them without getting caught up in the negativity of that. But it's a great question, right? It's a big leadership issue for us.
And Google, I mean, you mentioned AI, and Google is not able to deal with that right now, right? I mean, with all the negative publicity they've got,
Yes.
people leaving, and I mean, that's classic way of how not to do it versus, I guess, what Microsoft did. I
Yeah.
didn't know about this Microsoft example. It's inspiring. Thank you for that.
Yeah, actually, I talk about it in my book because I interviewed Jean-Philippe and how he's actually created this whole group called AI for Good.
Hey, Swati, can I
Thank
go
you.
next?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hey, Akhtar, thank you for a fantastic start to this thing. I think it's been a fascinating and insightful conversation. My name is Nikhil. I actually wanted to look at this, in terms of the positive aspect of us coming out of the pandemic. Has been all of us rallying together as an organization, as a community to help each other out. Emerge stronger from this. Uh, and as Harshul pointed out earlier, I think some of all of this was already in the DNA. But how do we build from your long experience in this area? What would advice be for us to build on this momentum, harness it, and make it stronger as we strengthen our core purpose of helping all of our stakeholders rise?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, right? So one thing that we have seen come out of the COVID work, I mean, the COVID environment, right? It has created these two groups. One, right in the beginning of COVID, I was actually writing my last chapter at that time when we shut down. And I start off my last chapter by saying, in a tongue-in-cheek way, that if you're reading this book, we have survived. Because at that time, we were not sure what was going to happen to us. But people came together. People came together, companies that were not able to meet in person were now not spending money on food, started taking all of that and giving it to food shelters to feed people that were not there. People were making masks, people were helping others. India, look at what has happened in India. I mean, it's the community that came together. I am hoping that we will actually bottle this up, that companies will take this as an opportunity and, to do more, and not more in terms of let's go spend more money on this, but more by actually creating learning opportunities and capacity building opportunities for employees to kind of take this forward in a way that becomes mutually beneficial by doing some capacity building, by doing some training, so that this doesn't fritter away when we kind of come back again and go back to our normal routines, whether it is a year from now, 2 years from now, or in a hybrid work. And I think that is the opportunity for companies today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wonderful questions and great answers, as expected, Akhtar. I know I'm a little cognizant of the time here. Swati, do we want to move towards closing? I'm sure there are a bunch of other questions which I'd seen over email, but maybe we could send those questions to you offline, Akhtar, if you're okay. Uh, and maybe move this towards closing, Swati?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've
sure.
just put my email in the chat. So if anybody wants to connect with me, chat with me, talk to me, please do so. Join my community online at my website where we can continue this conversation. Share what you have done individually in this last year.
Absolutely. And in case anybody wants a signed copy of your book, is there a way to manage it logistically?
Yes, absolutely. So if you want a signed copy of my book, you can order it from islandbooks.com, which is here on Mercer Island in Seattle. I will go and personally sign it for you and send it out to you, and then they will mail it out to you. So you can either order the copy from Amazon or whatever, wherever you order your books. But if you want a signed copy, this is my local bookstore. I can actually go there and sign it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, okay. Thank you so much, Akhtar. You've been wonderful. Your insights have been very incisive and valuable. Thanks for doing this. And team, there's a link also, I think, that Akhtar has put in the chat box. If you'd like his book, feel free to go ahead and do that. With that, Swati, maybe we can close the session. We came out more
Yeah.
enriched from this session, Akhtar, and again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Akhtar. Thank you, Harshul, for your time today. It was a wonderful session, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks much. Take
Thanks.
care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.